I'd like to welcome everyone in the room and online to the World Economics Forum's Impact Summit 2018. Today, we are joined by quite a few people who know a lot about forests and tropical forests, and why that's so key and crucial to us tackling the issue of climate change. Today, I'm joined by Justin Adams, Managing Director at Global Lens, but more importantly, the new Director of the Tropical Alliance. Welcome. Also by Nazir Foead, who's the head of Peatland Restoration Agency from Indonesia, and Jeff Seabright, Chief Sustainable Officer at Unilever. To get us started, I wanted to ask you, Justin, why are tropical forests so important? Most people think of forests as essential for carbon absorption, but they don't think really beyond that. Why do you think that it's such a crucial issue that we need to engage with?
Great, thanks, Elem. And firstly, let me just say how delighted I am to be here and excited I am to accept the role of the Tropical Forest Alliance Director, and I'm really looking forward to starting that work, whilst also acknowledging all the great work my colleagues are doing at TNC and the blessing they've given me to sort of take this role on. But why are forests important? I mean, forests are important for so many reasons, but for the climate reason in particular, we know that deforestation, largely deforestation in the tropics, is already accounting for more than 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and land use overall accounts for about 25% of land use emissions. So it's a big part of the climate problem. Yes, we have to decarbonize energy, but if we're not addressing the land use sector, we cannot get to a climate stable future. So we've got to address it, and new research that was published a year or so ago points to the land use sector, and forests in particular, really being able to deliver more than a third of the solutions. So we both need to stop deforestation and enhance restoration. And the tropics are where we have the richest, most biodiverse forest on the planet, and where we've got a crucial opportunity and a critical moment now to address the deforestation that's still occurring.
Thank you. Nazir, you're very much steeped in this, and Indonesia is a leader in tackling climate change. Can you share with us some of the particular challenges that Indonesia faces?
Yeah, in relation with TFA 2020, which is I think very much, Indonesia have already issued a policy of moratorium in terms of forest conversion, so all the natural forests and peatland have to be kept now, no longer for conversion. So the policy is out. It's a presidential decree. To have the policy fully implemented, I think we need to get also the private sector fully behind. Not only that they revise and improve their operating procedure or management plan, but also practice on the ground. Now, a platform like TFA 2020, which bring together private sector with government and NGOs, we believe will help with lift to a higher level of implementing this forest moratorium, or I think in TFA 2020 you call it the deforestation-free products. So that will help the government, and at the end of the day, it will help the people, because our government is thinking to increase the productivity of agriculture or other forest products on existing plantation, no longer converting natural forests, but existing forest plantation, increasing agriculture plantations, and so forth.
Jeff, you're bringing a different dimension to the conversation. What brought Unilever to that conversation? What was the impetus for your engagement? And what are the challenges that you guys are facing?
Well, thanks, and Justin, congratulations on the new role. Very excited. Unilever is a consumer goods company, and we buy a lot of agricultural commodities, including palm oil, which contribute to the tropical deforestation that we're talking about here. And as a member of the Consumer Goods Forum, which is an organization comprised of the world's leading consumer goods manufacturers and retailers, so Walmart, Carrefour, Nestle, Unilever, Coca-Cola, et cetera, made a commitment in 2010 to really eradicate deforestation from the supply chains in 4 key commodities: palm oil, soy, beef, and pulp and paper. And that effort was a commitment undertaken in 2010, but it was a recognition that there was the business alone could not tackle this challenge, that we needed to work with governments, that we need to work with civil society, with NGO partners, and others. And so that was actually called out in the commitment in 2010. And the creation of the Tropical Forest Alliance that came along 2 years later on the heels of the Rio +20 conference it really created that multi-stakeholder platform that allows business to work together with forest country governments like Nazir represents, as well as other governments and other partners. So critically important platform.
So when I was trying to get myself educated on this topic, I was really surprised by the fact that the 4 commodities that you named, because I'm a vegetarian. I stopped eating beef thinking that I was, having an impact, and I was shocked to discover that soy was also part of that. So what are the like options that are available, and what are the suggestions that you're hoping to implement through this partnership? And this is a question to you, Jeff. Also looking at how, what are the evidence that you've seen that have helped to resolve this?
Well, I think we've seen quite a lot of movement on the part of business. Not enough, clearly, because we're still kind of winning some battles but losing the war. The rate of deforestation continues, and it's a really critical challenge, as Justin outlined. I do think that the work that we're doing in partnership is beginning to yield some real fruits of our efforts. One example, and I was pleased 2 weeks ago in California to join with a representative from Sabah in Malaysia and WWF and other partners to announce a commitment that we've made to help support sustainable production of palm oil in the whole jurisdiction of Sabah, in the whole province. And a commitment that we've made to preferentially source from Sabah because of this commitment that they're making, as well as to invest in helping smallholder farmers become more sustainable in their practices. So, and that whole project and that whole partnership was generated by the Tropical Forest Alliance. The first meeting between Unilever and the government of Sabah took place in Jakarta at the first annual meeting of the Tropical Forest Alliance several years ago. And as a result of that continuing dialogue, we're now moving forward with real implementation. So I think that's just a recent example of the kind of practical partnerships that are emerging from the Tropical Forest Alliance.
So Justin, as the new director for the Tropical Forest Alliance, can you share some of your priorities and hoped for outcomes?
Yeah, so, firstly, just to acknowledge that this is not starting today, right? This has been a journey. As Jeff said, the Tropical Forest Alliance was originally set up in 2012, and I think it came into the World Economic Forum in early 2016 or around that time. So, and I want to acknowledge the great work of Marco Albani, who's the outgoing director of the Alliance, for the work that he's done in really sort of building the platform. But where we are now is 2 years away, or just over 2 years away from the 2020 deadline that was originally set by these consumer goods companies. And whilst there's been good progress on a lot of fronts, we've increased transparency, we know a lot more about where things are happening, we know more about why they're happening, we've got to accelerate action on the ground. And for me, the Tropical Forest Alliance will be at its best. It brings together all these different players from government, from civil society, and crucially from business. And also, just to say, not to forget indigenous peoples and local communities who are so crucial in many of the places that we're talking about. But we have to put this platform in service of the tropical forest countries. For too long, this has been seen as a Western agenda that's being imposed or being requested of these countries. And actually, there is a path forward where for these countries to embrace new forms of development, this can help them both boost their economic output, so we can still have production of commodities in these places, but without clearing more forest. There's opportunity on degraded land, as Nazir alluded to in Indonesia, for planting palm. I'm part of a big collaboration in Brazil that's working on the savannas surrounding the Amazon called the Cerrado. And in the Cerrado, we've just identified that there's millions of hectares of land that could be planted without clearing more native vegetation. So by bringing the science together, by bringing finance solutions together, by bringing commitments from private sector and supporting tropical forest governments, both at the national level and crucially at the state level, we can actually do more and achieve more. And that's really the hope by 2020, that we will have clear and real examples of progress in multiple places that points the direction to where and how we conserve our forests, and then how we start restoring some of our forests.
Nazir, do you, you're the that voice of the country in this conversation. Can you share with us some of the on-the-ground experiences that you've had and the outcomes that have come out of those?
Right, yeah. So I mentioned about increasing productivity from existing plantation in the case of owned by farmers. So the corporation, of course, they are looking for growth of production. And one way to do it is now helping the smallholder farmers, providing technical assistance and even financial assistance, and then access of the market. That will be good for the company in still growing their production. Of course, it's very good for the farmers now. They get support not only from the government, but also from their private partners, in this case companies, and helping them. And if we can prove that improvement of farmers in managing their land, the increasing productivity, to some degree also there are areas, forested areas nearby the plantation, and with cooperation of local government, corporate partners, and the farmers, in also managing and protecting that area, that will be excellent. And the Indonesian government issue a policy now that allow communities to get a special license in restoration or in conservation of the area, or using it, of course, sustainably. So you mentioned, Justin, about involving indigenous people and communities. That, at least in Indonesia, that is a very feasible option now.
And how has been the process for that inclusion? How have you been able to integrate their voice into that?
The planning, if we talk about economic development planning in one district or one area, it starting from the village level. So the head of the village, of course, with the council of the village, run a series of planning or FGD with the communities. And government officials usually also have partners of farmer groups in each village. So it comes together about how this aspiration of the people, how they want to change the land use in the areas. At the same time also, of course, government officials come up with reminding of this area for protection, this area for limited production, this area for intensive agriculture, and so on. If that is agreeable, then it brought up to the higher level. And then it become a national program. So the development process is as much as possible built from the bottom, and involving also a private sector who will be off-taker or partners of these farmers in increasing their productivity.
So my question for Jeff is, now that you have this momentum and you have all these projects moving, what will be your call to action to the other businesses who are here with us at the summit, but also moving forward? how they can also engage and how they also can participate?
Well, I think the opportunity is to really use the Tropical Forest Alliance as that sort of multi-stakeholder platform. So I would hope the message would be for others who are interested in this topic, and I hope that would include everybody at this summit, to really look at their own business, in the case of the business community, and determine where they, in their value chain, they could make a difference, and see what they can do as a member of TFA to help engage in that regard. Obviously, consumer goods companies, as Pak Nazir just mentioned, we buy those commodities, and so we have a very important role to play in doing that responsibly and offering our market power, if you will, to help enable and empower those communities to do the kinds of measures that Pak Nazir was just talking about. So I think there are lots of ways that companies can be involved. The financial community, very important in bringing finance to the face of some of these challenges of helping increase productivity, but not at the expense of the forest frontier. So finance is very important as well. So I think there are many opportunities for other businesses to contribute.
Okay. So I'm now going to open up the floor and see if there are any questions from our audience. If you can give us your name.
Hi, Catherine from Ecosphere and reporting for Thrive Global. I've got two questions. So one, I guess, will point to Jeff, and for Unilever, how can, or what are some innovative ways in which the media and entertainment community can help sort of drive, in your imagination, drive sort of the consumer demand for information and on the products within or the raw resources within different products, so that we create the incentives also from the market to then shift off of palm oil, for example, or find alternatives for sustainable palm oil. So that's one question. And then also to the indigenous narrative, which is brilliant. At the Global Climate Action Summit, the Land Forest Day, there were some brilliant presentations on how getting technology in the hands, GIS technology in the hands of the elder communities was enabling them to mark their lands and understand sort of where those communities had the rights to stewardship of these landscapes. And we know that when they have this sort of empowered voice and position, then they are able to, make some communications. They're able to have a voice at the table for deciding how these forests are managed. And so, how does technology, and that's maybe just one example, enabling sort of the indigenous voice to help them become stewards of the forest? Sorry, that was a little long.
So generally, I mean, on the media, I mean, obviously they play a huge role in helping shape sort of public understanding and expectations and awareness. And I think, we saw some of that on display at the Global Climate Action Summit in California a couple of weeks ago. And in particular, and I would recommend this to anybody who's keen, #ForgottenSolution, which is what Justin spoke about at the outset of this, talking about the important natural climate solutions that we need to be stepping up to, which is really what the TFA, the Tropical Forest Alliance, is addressing. And but getting the awareness of people across the political spectrum around this issue is critically important, and bringing the voices of popular culture and the arts actually into this as well is really important, because this has to be a movement that people are really motivated to engage on. And I think that the inspiration that media, entertainment, and sort of the arts can bring to not just this topic, but the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals in general, is actually quite important, because this has to be a matter of the heart, not just of the mind, and we have to engage. So I think we saw a lot of that in California, and it was interesting to see some great people like Alec Baldwin, and he did some podcast on forest that were quite powerful, an interview with Jane Goodall and Paul Pullman, the CEO of Unilever. Harrison Ford spoke powerfully as well. So, beginning to really penetrate popular culture, I think, with some of the awareness around the vital instinct, because we're so disconnected from the forest, as we become increasingly urbanized as a planet, that connection to nature tends to weaken, right? And so we need to be reminded in visceral ways of how critically important it is. And I think media and related entertainment and the arts can play a huge role.
Yeah, so let me just build on that for a second, because I think this connection to nature is critical. Because I think everybody can remember some experience of being connected to nature and what that means for them. But what we have to do is bring it more into the everyday mind for everybody of just how reliant on nature we are. Because without trees, we can't breathe. Trees produce the oxygen, right? Trees absorb the CO2 that's going to help limit warming. Trees cool cities if we plant trees in cities. Jakarta is actually talking about sort of bringing nature into the city, right? So there's some really nice examples of how we connect people to nature. And I think that the other thing I would say is, having spent the last 4.5 years in the Nature Conservancy, a wonderful and extremely powerful conservation organization, we've got to break out of it being an environmental issue and environmental stuff being somehow disconnected from people's everyday life. It's about life itself, and we've just got to kind of start celebrating that and connecting people with that in new ways. So I think media and communications plays a huge role in how we do that. To your question on Indigenous peoples are critical for this entire agenda, because Indigenous peoples are believed to hold rights to about forest land and land across the planet that's about 80% of all the remaining biodiversity on the planet is in indigenous lands, and about 25% of the forest carbon is indigenous hands. So they are already the stewards of the forest, right? We don't need to teach them how to be stewards of the forest, but your example of giving indigenous groups and communities technology to help them better map their territory that they may have been custodians of and stewards of for hundreds or thousands of years is a wonderful way of actually bringing modern technology and traditional beliefs together to actually be part of this solution. So there's a great campaign about the Guardians of the Forest and our support for the Guardians of the Forest. But it's worth also pointing out there are still hundreds of indigenous leaders and activists killed every year trying to defend their territories, right? So it's not an easy solution, but they are a crucial part of the whole solution. And then technology, as I think we've pointed to a couple of times, technology is enabling us to do more and more. But it's how we use that technology now that's going to really advance this agenda over the coming years. But most importantly, it's political will, it's private sector will, and it's about bringing people together in partnership to address the problem. That's what we need now. This cuts across silos, it cuts across organizations and sectors, and that's where the TFA is uniquely positioned to do more of that as the partner brokering those partnerships and raising our ambition.
I'd like to add also one example. This is dealing with indigenous people, but in the case where their land has been degraded in the results of previous conflicts. It's a degraded land, it's become wasteland. They still have part of forest that they kept, but big chunks of forest already degraded, and it easily kept fires every year because of the drought, extreme drought. So how could we turn that into a productive forest, reforested, but also have economic? There are a few examples in Indonesia where now the president, the government, still invite investors to build a manufacture for the forest products. But the president said, okay, investor A, I'll give you a license to build a manufacturer, but not the forest concession. So you have to have the indigenous people living around that area, certain radius, 100 kilometers or so, to replant the degraded land with the certain timber species that can fit into the mill, the manufacture. And there are examples now that is working in Indonesia. Even if they build the one example I can say, if they build the manufacture in the area which is very well infrastructure connected. So we have got good road. Economic wise, they still can buy these timber forest products up to 500 kilometers, so it's like what, 300 something miles. In the area where the road is not that good, so maybe it's only 150 miles. It means that this investor, these companies also have social responsibility in helping indigenous people to replant their forests. And it brings them income. And it helps biodiversity, colonizing this forest which is now being built. That story exists now in Indonesia.
It's a wonderful example of how business and governments and communities can come together and really support each other and really revitalize a land that might have been given up on. So on that beautiful story, a positive story, I will close this press conference and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Ellen.